Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much to folks joining us live for today's Lunch and Learn, Mass Timber in Maine, a strategic opportunity for climate action and economic growth. And thank you so much to everyone watching the recording. I'm really excited for today's conversation. This is one of those topics that sits right at the intersection of climate action, economic opportunity for our state, and Maine's identity as the most heavily forested state in the nation. We're so lucky to be joined by Jennifer Shakun and Vanessa Komada from the New England Forestry Foundation, who bring deep expertise both on policy and on the ground realities of this work. And we're also so excited to be joined by Representative Sam Zager of Portland, who will help ground this conversation in what's happening right now at the Maine Legislature. Thank you three so much. My name is Maggie Summers. I'm the Outreach Director here at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations represent more than 13,000 members and supporters dedicated to bringing a just, thriving future for all by acting on the climate crisis, protecting the environment, and safeguarding our democracy. Maine Conservation Alliance does that by bringing people and organizations together to educate, inspire, and advocate. And MCV does that by advocating for equitable policies, holding elected officials accountable, and winning elections. And since 2020, this weekly online Lunch and Learn series has helped us advance all of these goals, creating a shared space to explore our environmental and social history, policy priorities, climate action movement, and more. And just a few notes before we dive in. We're going to hear from our presenters first and then tackle your questions and the Q&A session at the end. You don't have to wait though. Please send your questions to me or Gabe Cole through the chat as they occur to you, and we'll synthesize them and ask as many as possible following the presentation. And we ask that you please not message the presenters in the chat. They're going to be focusing on, presenting. And so please message me or Gabe. And if you have any technical difficulties, please message Gabe through the chat and he can help you out. And this event is being recorded and the video will be posted on our YouTube channel later this afternoon. So thank you so much to all of you. And Representative Zager, I am going to hand it to you to start us off, and I'll get your slide up.
Thank you so much, Maggie. I've been very much looking forward to this, John, joining you and Jennifer and Vanessa in speaking about mass timber. I'm very excited about it. As you outlined, it is crucially important. I've been trying very hard in the legislature to carry the banner of mass timber so that people understand that it's a win-win. It's actually a win-win-win in a lot of ways, and I'll kind of explain very briefly in the next few minutes kind of what I mean. Um, on the slide, I think people can appreciate the beauty of mass timber, the importance and the structural value of mass timber. These are different projects. The one in the upper left is the Arctic Studies Center at Bowdoin College here in Maine. That is built with mass timber, and the top right is the design school, the School of Design at UMass Amherst. The bottom left is it's an artist rendition, although that building is now built. It's in Westbrook, near the Portland Westbrook line, a place called Rock Row. And then the bottom right is England. That's a swimming pool in Surrey, England, in the UK, and it just kind of shows these are different kinds of buildings, high water moisture environments, certainly beautiful. There are others that are in Paris that are just lovely, blending in with the architectural design of 19th century Paris. And one I'll also mention that's not depicted, but people often ask, how tall can you build with mass timber? The tallest building in the world right now is 25 stories tall. That is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and people can look that up. There's a building in Brisbane, Australia, that's an entire city block built with mass timber. Generally, it's something kind of a little bit bigger than a single family home, but smaller than what we now consider skyscrapers. Although mass timbers can reach what historically was a skyscraper. It is composite, kiln dried material. It's called sometimes mass timber is described or mentioned as cross-laminated timber. CLT is actually one type of mass timber, but mass timber is essentially you take raw wood and it is cut, kiln dried, and often laid at right angles to be very structurally sound. It's also very environmentally friendly. We'll get more into that today. It's fire safe. This is also a common question. And structurally sound, the University of Maine, the University of Washington, and other institutions have done a lot of research showing that it actually is at least as good as concrete and steel for technical reasons, which I can get into a little bit, but there's actually other resources that would be better for that. Uh, it is beautiful. I don't think I can tell people that it's beautiful. I think people need to appreciate that for themselves. And it's also a huge economic opportunity. These are things that I've emphasized here in the legislature with legislation that I've posed in the last couple of sessions. Mass timber building is catching on in over the last 20 years or so, the slope of growth has dramatically increased. And it's just as this technology is appreciated more and more, people realize that it is all the things that I've mentioned. It just answers the needs of so many projects that are out there, whether they be academic or commercial or governmental. I think. I think I can talk a little bit more about the efforts that's been going on in briefly in the Maine legislature. We have conducted a study. We asked the University of Maine's uh, their composite research lab to look in mass timber to look at the marketplace, understand why it hasn't caught on more, to appreciate opportunities for how Maine can be a leader, and how New England can take more of a role broadly. There is no mass timber producing facility in the Northeast. That is New England, that is the Mid-Atlantic. None of those states have a mass timber producing facility. So these beautiful projects that are built in from, say, North Carolina to Maine and as far west as Ohio are built by bringing in wood that has been turned into mass timber from further out west, deep south, or Europe. The projects like and I represent part of Portland, and the University of Southern Maine uh, built a student center in Portland called the McGoldrick Center. Wanted to do it with mass timber. Ultimately, it ended up just having a few features of mass timber, not structural portions, and that wood came from Austria. The wood came from Austria in this state that is 89% covered in really great timber that can be very sustainably harvested, which is crucially important from a conservation perspective. So we'll get into a little bit more of the climate response pieces that I know Vanessa and Jennifer are experts in from a forestry perspective. And so I think I'll stop there and look forward to learning more and hearing people's questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Jen, if you want to take over the screen sharing.
Sure thing. Thanks, Maggie. Well, hi everyone. It's really nice to be with you, and Representative Zager did perfect intro for the next little bit more of a deep dive that Vanessa and I have planned for you all about this material, mass timber, um, which as you mentioned is really a suite of different wood products that are new innovative uses of wood that are really changing how we build and what we can build with. And our potential to ramp up the use of this material really does create a kind of a climate win in reducing the carbon footprint of the built environment and a potential big economic opportunity for a state like Maine that has a long heritage of using and producing sustainable wood products. And so we thought we would start. I'll just give you a brief introduction to New England Forestry Foundation. That's the organization that Vanessa and I work for. Um, and it'll help you understand a little bit about why we're really jazzed about mass timber and see the benefits, the triple win that Representative Zager mentioned. So NEF is a regional conservation nonprofit organization that was founded in the mid-1940s. It's somewhat unique because we are a land trust. So we are in the land conservation game. We monitor and manage more than 1 million acres of conservation easements. We also own just over 40,000 acres of land in our community forest that we manage as a demonstration of really exemplary forestry, even as those are open to the public and sometimes have recreational amenities. So it's meant to be a real demonstration of multiple use forest management that meets all of these values for wildlife and climate and wood production. And Vanessa and I work on the programmatic side of NEF's work, where we have programs with landowner outreach and science and various things, but we really focus a lot on the end consumers of those sustainable wood products. And so that's led us to have a lot of engagement with the architecture, engineering, and construction industry in the last decade or so, and on a variety of products, but especially mass timber. And so you heard a bit about this, but just to introduce you, mass timber is, as I said, a suite of different wood products. So you see some bunch of examples on the screen here. What they all have in common is they all involve taking smaller pieces of lumber or pieces of wood and fastening them together with adhesives, glues, wooden dowels, or nails. And from that, you create these massive, hence mass timber, structural elements that can be used. They have a very strong strength to weight ratio. And so they can be used in place of materials like concrete and steel in very large buildings. The two you'll probably hear the most about are highlighted in yellow. So your upper left is one is glulam. Glulam's been around for a while. There, the boards are laid parallel to each other. You can actually create some really beautiful curves with glulam. And I think that the swimming pool example that you saw in the previous photo has some really beautiful glulam columns. And then the other one that we talk a lot about in this space is, as you just heard, is cross-laminated timber or CLT, where its application and its innovation comes from laying down those boards in layers perpendicular to each other, which makes it very stiff and very strong. Um, and so that's the one where, because of those properties, you can use CLT for shear walls and floors and roof decks. And so it's one of the most important products here that allows us to build bigger with mass timber. And so those are the products, but there's a whole bunch of different benefits. And I think the reason that you end up seeing a lot of folks from the conservation nonprofits to the forest products industry and a whole spectrum of people getting excited is because there are benefits for the community in terms of the folks living around where these buildings are constructed, the folks living and working in mass timber buildings, for the broader environment because of the materials they're made out of, and for the economy. And so I'll say a few words about that. One, it's already been alluded to, but the wood finishes are really beautiful and they really lend themselves to biophilic design, where you're bringing nature and natural materials into the built environment. And there's actually some really good evidence of how much people benefit from living and working in spaces surrounded by natural materials. The biggest thing you notice when you go in a mass timber building is the smell. It smells like wood and it's really lovely. And you can also leave a lot of those wood finishes exposed, so you end up using less material. You don't need drywall, for example, in some cases. And that also is both an aesthetic and a material and cost saving and carbon saving advantage. The other thing we'll talk about a little bit more in a second is that mass timber really lends itself to off-site prefabrication. So the panels and beams much of the manufacturing process can happen off-site in a factory setting, and it comes to the building site basically ready to be erected. So the buildings go up very quickly. And it's a nice work environment for the folks constructing the materials. And the biggest thing you'll hear about with mass timber from, well, at least at our organization, one of the things that excites us most is the carbon and climate mitigation potential of mass timber. As I said, because you can use it in place of things like steel and concrete and aluminum, those materials have very high carbon emissions associated with their extraction and manufacturing. And so when you can swap in a bio-based material like wood, you end up with a big carbon savings there. And when those trees were alive, they were sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, turning it into woody material. And when they're cut and become a solid wood product, they're still storing that carbon. So the building itself ends up becoming like a carbon vault. The CLT panels and glulam beams you see in this background photo, those are still going to hold that carbon for the life of that building product. And it lends itself to reuse at the end. If a building needs to change for some reason, um, you know, as long as that product stays in use, it is holding that carbon. I could go on and on, but I'll pop on to the next one because here we'll dive a little bit more deeply into the question of mass timber and affordability. So as you heard earlier, this material is very well suited to a whole variety of different building types. It can be and is used for things like large public performance spaces, museums, housing, office space, you name it. But there's a lot of growing excitement in particular about the ability of mass timber to reduce costs and for housing. And it helps on two fronts. So to help with the housing affordability, we have to reduce construction costs and we have to increase housing supply. And so a number of the things I just mentioned, characteristics of mass timber, are the things that help it reduce construction costs, especially as it's becoming more common. More and more firms have built with it in the US, and there's a little bit of a learning curve because you have to design specifically for this material and the right grid spacing and its properties. But when done well, as I mentioned before, you can have fewer finishes. Because it's lighter, you can actually have a smaller foundation, which saves energy, it saves cost. Things go up very quickly. That translates into cost savings for our building project. And on the supply side, because of the nature of the material, some of those wall and floor assemblies are actually thinner than with traditional materials. And there are examples where we can get an entire extra story in a building of the same height in some of our urban and exurban environments. So it can be used, as I said, for all different types of buildings at different sizes, but it fits very nicely with the 6 to 12 story range, which is a size of building that in a lot of urban areas throughout the Northeast we need more of. You can't build that big with light frame wood, and it's not as economical to build that with concrete and steel. So we end up with a gap in our housing infrastructure, especially near transit hubs and places where this kind of mid-rise construction is very much needed. And then the last thing I'll touch on here before turning it to Vanessa is to delve in a little more deeply to the carbon question. There's a lot of numbers on this slide. What I just wanted to communicate to you all is that this is just a somewhat random hodgepodge of studies that I've picked. There's a lot of research and investigation to the carbon differential of building with this material versus more traditional concrete and steel structures. And we see very consistently that it reduces the carbon footprint of that building. And the amount to which it reduces that varies by a lot of different factors. But it is a savings for the reasons we talked about before. Because it is a less emissions intensive material than those alternatives, you have a carbon savings right up front, and then you're actually storing carbon in the building, which is a big benefit. And we have to always acknowledge, and this is important to the heart of our organization, that whenever we're using wood products or increasing our use of them, the sustainability of the harvesting and the sourcing of the wood, of course, is part of that equation. And many of you are likely familiar with forest certification systems like Forest Stewardship Council, FSC, or Sustainable Forestry Initiative, SFI. Maine is one of the states in our region that has a lot of certified land. That is one way to think about the sustainability of wood sourcing. But we also have a lot of good examples and other models in our region where people are implementing forest management practices that benefit wildlife, like the Forestry for Maine Birds program, or a lot of more discussion in the last decade or so on practices that really benefit climate in the forest and in the resulting products. And our organization has our exemplary forestry approach was about trying to balance those values as well and deliver on all of those fronts. So this is just to say that there's a lot of research and practice in New England behind doing really good forestry, the kind of forestry that you really need to make the sustainability claims around mass timber buildings really work. And so I'll stop there, and Vanessa is going to take us through the rest of the next few slides.
realized I was muted. Okay. Thanks, Jen. So, kind of kicking off after talking about all the benefits of mass timber, its carbon potentials, its benefits to the environment, to the economy. What does current demand projections and trends look like for the northeastern region? So on the left-hand side, we have the 2017 Pure Report projections for mass timber demand in the northeast region, and so starting the first, I think, CLT manufacturing facility in the United States was in 2010. So I think, kind of taking off from that period, we're really seeing projections of up to like 2.1, 2.2 million cubic feet, cubic meters of mass timber. And on the right-hand side, we see Woodworks, which is a nonprofit organization that helps with all things around wood products, especially mass timber. I would recommend actually visiting their website. They have a variety of resources. But they've been keeping track of the number of mass timber building projects across the United States. They have a map where you can click on each individual project and really understand, what were the products used, who is the architect, the developer, etc. But based on that, we can see a clear trend of the number of projects that are increasing every year. And to be noted, these are projects that are actually built on the ground. There are a number of projects that are being planned, are in process, that are not recorded in this current graph. And so, but we have been seeing clear trends that the demand for mass timber in the northeastern region is increasing, and especially for cross-laminated timber specifically. Do you want to switch the slide, Jen? Thanks. So knowing that demand for mass timber is increasing, I wanted to touch on what does the current mass timber manufacturing situation look like within the United States. And so the 2018 or 2017 Peoria report reported that less than 10% of global CLT production is in North America, with the first CLT mills starting operations in 2010. And while Europe is still dominating in the space of mass timber production, there has been a number of facilities that have come up since 2010, as you can see in this map, with kind of hot spots right now in the Pacific Northwest, the southern United States, and parts of eastern Canada. But that provides, there's a real gap and need in the New England region to support the demand increases that we're seeing. And so I want to highlight 3 of these facilities on this map. As you can see in the upper right, there is a oriented strand board facility located in Holton, Maine. But what I want to focus on more so is the potential for cross-laminated timber and glue-laminated timber. There's a growing interest in those products specifically because of their capacity to meet, to be prefabricated, to meet affordable housing needs, etc. And so for those specific products, the 2 manufacturers that use New England wood currently are just 2. And that would be Sterling Structural, located in Phoenix, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, and Element 5, located in Ontario. And so Sterling Structural was in a partnership starting in like the 2017, 2018 time period with the New Hampshire Extension and Innovative Natural Resource Solutions. And they did a variety of research and collaboration to really get a product line using New England wood. And so that product line is now active. It uses eastern hemlock and spruce pine fir species from the New England region for their CLT products. And Element 5 is currently undergoing their testing and their development to get product line for New England species as of late 2026 is what they're estimating. So that's coming soon, and that's really exciting because they're a little bit closer to this region. But still, both of these facilities are located outside of the New England region, and that increases the cost for transportation, that increases the amount of carbon being released for the transportation and the back and forth. And so if we're really thinking about, trying to make an environmental carbon savvy decision, having a facility in the New England region could really benefit us in that way. And also in cost savings. Transportation costs are very high right now. But I also want to focus on, why Maine specifically? How is Maine situated as a key player or as a key player for the potential in the mass timber market? There have been a number of studies that have looked at the wood supply and investment potential of a mass timber facility in the New England region, and I've put them here. I know Representative Zager had mentioned the case for CLT manufacturing in Maine, which was a report published in 2019 with the research done by the UMaine Composite Center. Our organization, the New England Forestry Foundation, partnered with Peoria to create a report that assessed the wood New England supply on a broader scale, Maine and New England. And there's also been the Mass Timber Dialogue Report, which was a group of experts that came together to kind of discuss what the potential looked like, what were the bottlenecks, what was the potential, etc. So that was that report. And then most recently in 2026, collaboration with the Northern Border Regional Commission, Northern Forest Center, and U.S. Forest Service came together to kind of look at the updated numbers and updated potential of what that looks like for New England. And so I encourage anyone who's interested in this topic, specifically for Maine, to look at these reports and to read them because they really go into a lot of detail. And we're more than happy to share links to those reports after this presentation. So what are the species that Maine produces, that the New England region produces that can be turned into mass timber? If you look at the right-hand map there's 4 predominant forest types in the New England region, those being the northern hardwoods and spruce fir, which is identified in that dark green color. That's what we think of for our Acadian forests, our higher elevation forests of the White and the Green Mountains, tends to support a lot more spruce pine fir species. Then we transition into the transitional hardwoods. As you move farther south, the predominance of hardwoods increases into our central hardwoods. And then there's a little portion on the coastal part of Maine for pitch pine oak. And so currently, the only species that are certified for mass timber in this region are eastern hemlock and anything designated under what they call spruce pine fir south. And so in the right-hand side, I've included a little box of what all tree species are included underneath that designation. And so there is research going on in the background to try and certify a variety of hardwood species, things like oak, ash, maple, etc. But that work is ongoing. So right now we're just looking at softwoods. So I guess for a little bit of background, softwoods are basically our evergreen coniferous trees. They're going to have needles. They're not going to shed those leaves every year. They tend to be a lighter wood, which provides a little bit more flexibility with what they can be turned into, and really great fit for a lot of these structural systems because it's a lighter wood. The softwoods also generally tend to grow faster, which can be beneficial for production. Whereas our hardwoods are more of our deciduous trees, thinking maple, oak, ash, like those types of species, which tends to be a harder, denser wood, which we typically use more for like flooring, cabinetry, our interiors of buildings rather than our structural components. And so I've outlined in a table on the left there kind of some of the species that we grow in this region that can be used in mass timber for each of those forest type designations. And so according to the Peoria report, roughly 85% of the spruce fir dimensional lumber grades in New England are suitable for CLT production. Right now, the 2 grades that can be used are number 2 grade and MSR grade, which stands for machine stress related. I would say Maine does not produce or very rarely produces MSR line wood, but we do have a significant portion of number 2 grade, which can be used for these mass timber products. And I think one thing that's important to note with the proposition of having a new mass timber facilities, there might be concerns over whether that would increase harvests for the region, whether there would be any conservation concerns. So I just wanted to point out that in New England, the growth to drain ratio is roughly 2 to 1. So that tells us that we're growing more than what we're harvesting. And simultaneously, according to the Mass Timber Dialogue report, they really found that a robust mass timber supply would result in very little additional harvest for the region. And that specifically, fiber supply to mass timber facility represents in less than 2% growth of fiber supply for the region. So for this slide, I really wanted to, again, highlight why Maine is a key player and situated as a key player for New England to produce a mass timber product and have a facility. So first, Maine is located to three of some of the largest cities in the United States: New York, Boston, Philadelphia. You can see in that map with the bluish coloring that all three of those cities are within 500 miles of central Maine. And we have a significant road system and networks across the regions, more especially in the southern part of the state. And that's really key to note because that is where a lot of the demand for mass timber is going to be happening. Between those three cities, that's about 10 million residents. And so according to the National Low Income Housing Coalition in 2024, they said between those three states, there's about 1 million housing units, affordable and available housing rental units that are short. And so not only are we adjacent to these areas, but that we know that there's a huge housing crisis across the region. And so mass timber is a great fit because it's able to be prefabricated, because it's a great fit for affordable multifamily housing. And so that is a great match that we're excited about and really shows potential for demand for the region. The other thing to note is that with a lot of these cities, a lot of them have climate goals in which they encourage low carbon building materials. And again, that aligns right with mass timber as it is a low carbon or low emission carbon emission material. The second thing is more than half of the timberland in New England is located in Maine. As you can see in this picture on the right-hand side that depicts spruce fir sawlog density, Maine has the highest density of the species that we can use for mass timber. And again, Maine is the only state with the majority softwood. So that really situates Maine as an immediate actor that's ready to take on manufacturing of these products. The third thing is that Maine has the workforce, has a knowledge and experience of harvesting, manufacturing, and producing forest products already. And so that alone situates the state, again, as ready to take on mass timber manufacturing. The other thing to add is that often producing these facilities is a huge money investment. But Maine has a little bit of an edge in that although it's really unfortunate that we've had a number of paper mills close over the years, that does provide some infrastructure that can be utilized and can be taken advantage of if folks were interested in creating a facility in this region. I'm thinking like the East Millinocket, the Madison facilities. All of those are large industrial complexes that have systems already set up, whether that's rail or roadways, in which to distribute wood products. And so that is a real advantage for the state. The last thing I wanted to note is Maine was an early adopter of the 2021 IBC timber codes, which allowed for mass timber up to 18 stories. And I wanted to highlight this only because it allows a larger span of types of mass timber products that can be built for the state. We have, you can use it for single family homes, but now we have a larger spectrum and applications of how we can use this product in the region. And the other thing is that I think the fact that Maine adopted this earlier with some of the other states, that provides a clear signal to developers and architects in the region that Maine is interested and invested in mass timber specifically. And so I think that really signals and situates Maine as a leader in this region.
Thanks, Vanessa. I think that kind of concludes the details we wanted to share with you all. And so Feel free to hit us up with questions shortly if anything we missed. But we wanted to leave you with a last kind of big picture note, which is that, there's a vision here for New England and for Maine where a whole variety of constituents from the forest to the city benefit from the introduction of this new manufacturing and this potential new industry, right? So it's the forest land owners and the forest products industry that will be producing this material. And then we're also connecting consumers to the forest, and it allows us to offer an opportunity to build with materials that are beautiful, but also healthier and lower carbon and have a lot of benefits to compared with what has been used for a lot of our construction, a lot of our building stock in the last number of decades, and especially with um, the urgency of reducing emissions. The part of what's exciting here is that we know there's a lot more building infrastructure that needs to happen, likely in the next couple of decades. And if we build it with those more traditional materials of concrete and steel, they're working hard to decarbonize those industries, which is wonderful. And we're always applauding that because sometimes hybrid buildings are a great complement, right? Light frame steel with mass timber, but this is a swap out for this type of material that gives you kind of like an instant carbon savings, which is really important given the time frames in front of us, where we don't have to trade off on building what we need for people, and doing it in a way that doesn't harm our climate goals and the broader climate. So we just wanted to leave you on that note. And I think you'll all be getting a copy of our slides too, so you can have our contact information, but feel free to reach out to us with questions or interest. So just appreciate the chance to talk with you all today.
Thank you all so much. That was incredible. I've personally learned a lot, and we have so many questions. There's no way we're going to get through them all. But I did want to start, and I think, Jennifer, I'll start with you for this. We saw a few examples of mass timber buildings in the beginning, both in Maine and beyond. And I was just wondering if you could share a couple of examples that really stand out to you and how they show what's possible here in Maine.
Well, I'll note a few, and then I'm guessing Vanessa and Sam have others that maybe are their favorites. One that pops immediately to my mind is the Jessup Memorial Library in Bar Harbor. That's a fairly new Masterford product. It's an addition to their historic library. And what makes it particularly exciting is it's one of the examples from one of the manufacturers that Vanessa mentioned, where they actually are able to use New England grown wood. Um, I think Eastern hemlock in that case. Vanessa can fact check me, which is really exciting. And when we talk with folks building these buildings, the Bolden buildings are a really beautiful example. And there's a museum in that one you can actually go in, which is a really cool museum, even aside from nerding out about the beautiful structure that it's housed in. Even when people are building with stuff and they're using manufacturers from outside the region, we're often talking to them about how that is still a demand signal. So it's still a win, but as Representative Zager said at the beginning, we're like, the really exciting piece is when we can fully close that loop on a truly local supply chain. And from our experience, a lot of architects and designers and some of these building owners would love to have that option. We think there's kind of some pent-up demand specifically for that, because the story of this material is very compelling to people, and I think for good reason. And so, yeah, having a truly local option is going to be really exciting. But if others have favorite buildings they want to call out, feel free to add to the list. There's many more than two. I can't even keep track of them anymore because there's new ones all the time.
Yeah, I think early on, Representative Zager had an image of the Gibson Center for Arctic Studies included as one of the mass timber highlights. And yeah, I just want to reiterate that one is both a beautiful building, and when they were considering building it, they did a life cycle analysis study on the building and found that there was significant embodied carbon reductions with using mass timber for that building. And so that was of real interest to them. And they also found that constructing with mass timber ended up being 3 to 4 weeks faster than constructing with more business as usual materials. And so I think that's a real showcase of the benefits of using mass timber within the region, and was exciting to see. So.
Representative Zager, anything to add?
I agree with what's already been mentioned. The MKE building in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, is a great example of the what New England grown, sustainably grown, and New England built mass timber could do in places like Philadelphia, New York, and Boston, as well as the 6 to 12 stories building that could do so much for the housing crisis that we have been struggling with. So. I appreciate the other ones that have been mentioned too.
That is so helpful. Thank you all. And so thinking about some of the things that I'm most excited about, I'm sure a lot of Mainers are excited about, is the economic opportunities, especially jobs and creating jobs here in Maine. So what kind of jobs are we actually talking about, and where in the state would these communities see these benefits, if we know?
I'll mention something just to get the ball rolling on this. The Maine Forest Products Council is extremely excited about mass timber, and they have a portfolio of doing anything possible to improve woodland jobs from in the woods, wood basket kinds of jobs through manufacturing, and then there's of course a lot of distribution. There's a lot of truck drivers and other folks that are crucial to making these pieces all linked together. I have to mention that although I came from this as somebody who does believe that the climate crisis is the number one policy issue that we have to address because for all the reasons. That's not the only thing here, and others come at this as simply an economic development opportunity. We talk about heritage industries and how important that is to a diversified economy in our state and other states. And as I'm a physician. I sit on the Health and Human Services Committee. I look at things we call social determinants of health and that the economic the vibrancy of a community has a lot to do with things that are more downstream we see as things like the opioid crisis or child welfare or just how vibrant the economy of a state or community is that has all sorts of spillover benefits. So when we talk about the benefits of mass timber, it's especially would be great for places that really, really, really could use some economic development in New England. That would be, that has a lot of human value, but it also has a lot of environmental value. It also has a lot of collective value. So that's just sort of putting it into a broader context and things that come up in policy discussions about this, because there's a lot of technical reasons that it's great. There's a lot of aesthetic reasons. The Portland Museum of Art held a conference about mass timber from the aesthetic as well as some of the other things we've talked about. So there's really so much about this that people can rally around.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. From my perspective and seeing, looking more broadly, stepping back, looking at the forest industry, I think the other thing that mass timber provides is just a more diverse and more variety to the types of wood products we produce in the region, which to me brings an additional sense of security for our existing wood and forest infrastructure, because it provides, especially if it provides a lot of money, that could be an incentive to landowners to, oh, maybe I will manage my forest, or maybe I'm going to harvest more sustainably to produce these larger wood products for mass timber. And so to me, it's like almost like all part of the health of the forest industry in general. And so I think, yeah, I think there will be benefits to other industries, even if they're not producing mass timber specifically, because it's overall improving the long-term stability and health of the forestry market. Does that make sense?
Thank you so much. And so we know that demand across the Northeast and across the country is growing, but supply obviously is limited. So I'm just wondering, where does Maine fit into that gap, and why is this such a timely opportunity? And I just want to add, I've gotten quite a few questions about existing infrastructure here in Maine, like paper mills. And so I was just wondering if you could touch on how that is playing a role in this.
I'll mention that. I mean, this is a timely opportunity because of the pent-up demand that was mentioned. I think Jen talked about that a bit. There are a lot, as I've talked to people who are come at this from the architecture and design and construction part of it, and they say that if you have a project in mind, there's of course several years of that from conception, design, et cetera, et cetera. If you think of it as a mass timber project from the beginning, that saves money. Saving money from the beginning makes it easier to make it happen, to pull the project together. So having being able to pencil out these projects, knowing that there's a New England-based producer of mass timber, just makes the math better from the beginning, which makes the discussions easier in the boardrooms where these projects are considered for funding. And on the sites when important pieces making sure that there's fair labor practices and other things that are all part of the economics of a project. So the practicality depends on knowing that there's this much less lower cost or a much lower cost option for building materials that doesn't have to get imported from the West Coast or Canada or Europe. So that just makes the whole conversation easier and ultimately makes it contributes to the prevalence of mass timber. I really, even though we've grown, even though the growth of mass timber is increasing, I really think we're still in the early stages of this. There's indeed a lot of pent-up demand. That it's sort of like chicken and egg. If we can make it less expensive, then that dam is going to break. The log jam, I'll emphasize the pun. The log jam will break, and we can really do so much for mass timber.
Yeah, I also think like CLT specifically as a product is still very new to the North American region. Some of the other products like glulam are a little bit older, but CLT specifically is still a growing market within the United States. And I think based on the experiences that Jen and I have had at the International Mass Timber Conference and other conferences with a lot of architects, developers, there is a lot of interest in using local wood, and there just isn't a strong means for them to do that right now. And especially, even if they can source it from Sterling or Element 5, the costs might be higher because again this like transportation component where they're having to go out of region and then back into this region. And so I think the demand is growing. We're also seeing increases in, especially on the city level, for like embodied carbon reductions. That's increasing. So I think all those things simultaneously are situating this as a key time to bring a manufacturing facility here.
And let me just quickly jump in on
Yes.
that. Different states have different incentive programs. Here in Maine, there's been a bond proposal for mass timber, is LD 798, which people can look up. I have, for a variety of reasons that are essentially political, bonding it as a mechanism has been held up a little bit in the legislature. Won't get into all the details there, but it's not specific to mass timber. But states are really looking for ways to provide enough of an incentive to break that logjam. Because once we should make it less expensive, then all that pent-up demand will be much easier to flow forward.
And I think you did just answer my next question, which was, are we seeing interest from businesses and entrepreneurs in manufacturing spaces? And it sounds like very much yes, they want to be able to source local wood. They want to have, less transportation costs and everything. So that is really exciting. Um, and I'd love to talk a little bit about climate. I feel like we've been talking a lot about the economic benefits. But for folks who are newer to this, which myself included, how does mass timber actually reduce emissions compared to steel and concrete? And I believe you touched on this a bit, maybe Jen, but I'd love to just hear what you have to say.
Yeah, it does it on a couple of fronts. One is that if you know anything about the manufacturing process for some of those other materials like steel or concrete, by their very nature, as I mentioned, those industries are working really hard to innovate and decarbonize, but it's a tough hill for them to climb because, in part, because of the sheer amount of energy it takes, the temperatures you have to heat materials to in order to forge them are very high, and that's just inherently energy intensive. Um, and and so whenever you're trying to build anything, your first thought is, okay, what material am I going to use? What swap outs would actually reduce carbon right up front? Um, and so that's one of the biggest wins because um, if you just think about the manufacturing of a piece of lumber, it's less energy intensive than those alternative materials. Not to mention, the upstream extractive nature of some of those other materials. We love our forests, so we think often really carefully and rightly so about what our harvesting looks like. But those other materials often don't get as much of a critical eye, right? That the mining and the other extractive nature of getting the materials to make those non-renewable materials is also quite high, um, and not always as visible to the end consumer. It's hard to know where your steel comes from sometimes in terms of way upstream. And so that's one of the other pieces too, is like, of course, mass timber by its very nature is renewable because it is made from wood. And so in some ways, I see the interest in mass timber is a little bit of a bellwether of kind of a trend we see in the building sector toward better materials and toward more bio-based materials in general. People thinking about, all right, we need to build certain things. How do we build it with materials that are regenerative, that can biodegrade, that produce less waste, that can be used in a more circular way? And so mass timber helps on those fronts as well. If you think about I mean, I have some vinyl floors in my house, but when they get destroyed, I got to rip out pieces and replace them. The wood floors I can refinish, many, many times, and they will continue to serve their function. And so that's one of the special things about this material. So that was a little bit of a tangent from your original question, Maggie, because the laundry list of benefits. But yeah, it's really that the substitution benefit, avoiding the emissions that would have otherwise happened from those materials. And then, as we mentioned, the carbon storage itself. This material sequestered carbon when it was a living tree and continues to hold that carbon um, in your wall. I'm sitting here at an antique dining table. That's my desk, and it's 100 years old. This thing's storing carbon still and will for a long time to come.
Thank you so much. And you just touched on it a little bit when we're talking about harvesting practices, but we've gotten quite a few questions about what scaling this industry would look like in Maine, what it would look like for Maine forests, and in particular, would there be any clear cutting involved? So just thinking about how we're going to go about sustainably harvesting.
I would direct people to the University of Maine's work on this. Shane O'Neill and others there have a very, very, very strong interest in ensuring the durability of Maine's Maine's forests and harvesting only less than what would be hazardous. I'm not an ecologist or forester but these are it's a very important question. It's the first question that I had when I first learned about this. But it can be done quite well. And all the people that are involved in this that I've talked to want it to be done well because it's like the killing the goose that lays the golden egg. There's a recognition that building with materials that we're living has to be done in a way that's sensible and sustainable.
And I guess I would add to that in my experience, because sustainability broadly is a big driver of interest in mass timber, these kinds of questions are often baked into the conversation that folks are having when considering whether to use it. And that sends an upstream demand signal, right, of wanting to recognize the good forest management that's there and identify it. And people are getting more curious about where their materials come from. In some ways, it parallels what we've seen with the local food movement. Who grew this for me? How was it grown? Where did it come from? People are asking those questions about their wood as well. And a lot of Maine forestry has a really good story to tell in that regard. And there are certain, for different builders, they can choose certification or other standards or try to source from different types of landowners. There's also kind of a growing movement in the building sector around transparency around materials. And the big flagship project that Vanessa and I talk about a lot is the PDX airport in Portland, Oregon. It's a big wood project, used a lot of wood. And because it's kind of a showcase of their region, there was a lot of effort putting into knowing where all that wood came from. And there's actually really great signage and stuff in the airport if you ever come through there. And it's just an example of people wanting to showcase that. And so it kind of it creates an opportunity, I think, for the landowners who are supplying this and our forest products industry to kind of talk about what kind of standards and guidelines are already in place. And then I think it sends a signal that like that's really necessary. People are sort of saying like, I need to have this sustainability assurance with this material in order for this to check all my boxes. And I think that's valid.
Thank you. I would love to have one more question about materials, and then I have a question about what folks can do to make a difference right now. And so I just wondered, could you touch briefly on the sustainability of the materials that the timber is matched with, such as adhesive? And Jennifer, I know we talked about wooden nails the other day. So I'd just love to hear a little bit more about how the materials are, yeah, put together.
Yeah, and others feel free to jump in too. Basically, questions about the adhesives come up a lot, and there's been a lot of work and innovation in improving those formulations over time as well. There's kind of a whole frontier of people trying to create bio-based adhesives. There's probably folks at UMaine that are doing it because they're doing everything with bioproducts. But it's a relatively tiny percentage of the overall mass of that product. And so, most of the research and studies that have been done, there is not really any concern about toxicity or things like that in terms of, using the material or living in environments with this material. Um, in fact, if anything, as we mentioned, like you can avoid using other materials, things that we normally use to cover our wood framing, because you can leave just the natural wood surface exposed. Um, and oh, the other thought I wanted to add there was that there are some other wood-based materials that are a nice complement to mass timber. I think Vanessa, you might have alluded to this earlier, but wood fiber insulation is another great example, right? So now there's the facility in Madison, Maine, the first in the US that actually is producing wood fiber-based insulation. Basically, it's a bio-based alternative to the pink stuff that is in my house. And people who are building with extremely high performance buildings, passive house design, and a lot of kind of green building folks have been using that material for a long time, but they always had to source it from elsewhere because there was no one local who was making it. And so there are opportunities to even the other types of beyond the structure for the other pieces of our building systems, to swap in more wood-based and bio-based alternatives there, and it's made from lower grade wood and residuals and waste material. So it's another reason why it's a really nice complement in terms of diversity of wood products from different grades and species.
Yeah, and there is also nail laminated timber and dowel laminated timber.
Mhm.
Nails obviously using metal nails, although there is a manufacturer in Europe right now that uses beech. They create wooden nails from beech, And there's been some talk in the region about potentially trying to do some research and piloting around using beech nails for nail laminated timber. And then dowels, you don't need any adhesives because the heat of and the pressure of putting the dowels in the wood between the wood pieces adheses itself somehow. Don't ask me how, but it works. And so those are also two opportunities if folks wanted to avoid adhesive for any reason.
Good point.
There's
Yeah.
other mass timber options.
I think just to answer, what can people do? I would say we're a third of the way through April. I would say before the end of April, have 3 conversations with people that you know, that could be family or friends, about mass timber, what you learned or questions that you have, just to start talking about it. And then after talking about it a little bit with people you know, in the coming months, talk to people that you don't know. In particular, you can communicate with people who are running for office. Democracy is a beautiful thing, and it responds to the interests of people that it is accountable to. And so you can write emails to candidates. They all are looking to break out, and if they hear from people at candidate forums or online email, any way to reach out with candidates at any level of government about mass timber. There is something in this for everyone, and then if you tell them what you like about it, then the more they hear about it, the more they will start talking about what can we do here in Maine, here in New England, from a policy perspective, to make this happen.
Thank you so much. That was a perfect way to wrap us up. And you'll get more information about reaching out to those local candidates in my follow-up email. And I'll also share the slides, which has a bunch of resources. All 3 of you, Vanessa, Jennifer, Representative Zager, thank you so much for joining us. This was so informative. And I feel like it's really showed how much potential there is in this space, especially for our state, which is just so exciting. So thank you 3 so much. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for joining us.
Sure thing. Thanks, everyone.